A judge's decree, delivered in a courtroom colder than a morgue, was meant to be the end of my voice, the final nail in the coffin of my truth. He looked at me, a man whose signature on a piece of paper could unmake my world, and with an unnerving calm, he ordered me into absolute silence. He warned that if I ever spoke about the events that had transpired, if I dared to reveal the rot at the core of his court and the cruelty of his social worker, I could lose my daughter forever. He cloaked his threat in the guise of protecting her privacy, but the chilling glint in his eyes told a story of self-preservation. This was never about justice or a child's welfare. It was a brutal, calculated display of power, designed to crush a mother who had the audacity to challenge their authority. That day they stole my voice, believing they could bury the truth with my fear. But they were wrong. Before I continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below, and leave your like. Helps a lot. This is the only place I have left where my words can be my own, where the story they tried to erase can finally see the light of day. And I have to speak, because the psychological warfare they waged against my family is a horror that no one should ever have to endure. This isn't just my story of a single venomous comment that nearly shattered our lives. It's a cautionary tale about how the very system designed to protect our most vulnerable children became my family's most formidable predator. It had all begun with a moment of such pure, unadulterated joy. The memory is seared into my soul. The day I first met Maya. She was 6 years old, a tiny girl with enormous, intelligent eyes that seemed to hold the galaxy's worth of questions. Her smile, when it came, was a sunrise that could banish any darkness, a miracle given the life she had already endured. She had been adrift in the foster care system for 3 long years, passed between temporary homes like a forgotten parcel, a little girl forced to carry the weight of adult failures. For me, the journey to her had been its own war. I had fought for years through the suffocating labyrinth of the adoption process. Mountains of paperwork that questioned my every motive, invasive interviews, and forensic home studies. Years of sleepless nights filled with nothing but desperate, aching hope. And then, suddenly, there she was. The instant my hand closed around hers, a tiny warm hand that fit so perfectly in mine, I felt a profound sense of homecoming, as if a part of my own soul that I never knew was missing had finally clicked into place. I wasn't just becoming a parent. I was finding my daughter. The day the adoption was finalized, the courtroom felt warm and bright, a stark contrast to the one that would later become my prison. I wept with a relief so profound it left me breathless. I knelt down, looked into Maya's beautiful face, my Maya, and I made her a solemn promise. I told her that all the struggles, all the uncertainty were over. I promised her a lifetime of stability, of unwavering and unconditional love, of absolute safety. I truly believed our little house would be her permanent sanctuary. I was so tragically naive. I looked at the judge's signature as the finish line, the end of the fight. I had no idea it was merely the opening salvo in a war I didn't even know was being waged against us. And the first shot was fired by the very person the state had sent to ensure our peace. If you believe that family is built on a foundation of love, not cold bureaucracy, and that no parent should ever have to live in fear of the system meant to support them, then please stay with me. You will soon understand why I am risking everything to defy a judge and tell this story. Those first 6 months were an absolute dream, a blissful whirlwind of firsts that I collected like precious jewels. Her first birthday celebrated in a forever home, complete with a gloriously lopsided, multicolored cake we had baked together, covering the kitchen and ourselves in flour. The first time she woke from a nightmare and called for Mom without a trace of hesitation. Her voice so small and certain it made my heart physically ache with love. We were painstakingly, joyfully, building a life from scratch, creating our own traditions. As a white mother to a black daughter, I felt the profound weight and privilege of my responsibility, and I dove into it headfirst. I devoured books on the complexities of transracial adoption. My clumsy fingers, guided by hours of YouTube tutorials, slowly but surely learned to master the art of twists, braids, and bantu knots. We filled every bookshelf in our home with stories featuring powerful black heroines, from astronauts to princesses. We actively sought out and integrated into a diverse community, ensuring she would always see her own beautiful reflection in the world around her and understand the deep, resilient strength of her heritage. I was acutely aware of the history, of the legitimate concerns voiced decades ago by organizations like the National Association of Black Social Workers, who argued that white parents could not adequately prepare black children for the realities of a racist world. I didn't dismiss those concerns. I honored them. I also knew the grim statistics: how the child welfare system disproportionately investigates, penalizes, and dismantles black families. In a strange and misguided way, I thought my privilege as a white mother might act as a shield, protecting us from the system's inherent biases. I never imagined that very privilege would be twisted and used as a weapon against me. Post-adoption supervision was a standard requirement. Monthly visits from a social worker for the first year to ensure a smooth transition. Our first social worker, a kind, warm woman named Linda, was a blessing. Her visits felt less like an inspection and more like having a cup of coffee with a supportive friend who genuinely celebrated the love blossoming in our home. Then Linda retired. Her replacement was a woman named Mrs. Gable. The very moment she first stepped over our threshold, the atmosphere in our home shifted. It was as if a cold front had moved in, heavy and oppressive. Mrs. Gable was clinical and detached, her smile a brittle, forced gesture that never came close to reaching her cold, assessing eyes. As her gaze swept across our living room, over the photos of me and Maya laughing, over the stacks of children's books, I felt an involuntary shiver, a primal sense of being scrutinized and judged by a predator. Her questions were like tiny, sharp scalpels, each one loaded with insinuation. "Does she ever talk about her real family?" she'd ask, her tone suggesting Maya's life with me was somehow fraudulent. "Do you find it challenging to manage her hair?" The word challenging was delivered with a faint, almost imperceptible sneer, as if my earnest, fumbling attempts at a braid-out were a definitive sign of my maternal failure. I tried to explain, to share my enthusiasm about the YouTube tutorials I watched for hours and the wonderful black-owned salon we'd found for advice, but nothing I said seemed to register. Her expression remained one of bored disapproval. Every visit felt less like support and more like a hostile interrogation. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was just overly sensitive after the long, grueling adoption fight. But deep in my gut, a small, cold knot of dread was beginning to form. The visits became more and more invasive. Mrs. Gable began showing up unannounced, claiming she needed to observe our natural home environment. She would peer into our refrigerator, thumb through our mail, and most disturbingly, she would pull Maya aside and ask her questions when I was in another room. After these impromptu visits, Maya would become a different child, quiet, withdrawn, and clingy. She would crawl into my lap and just hold on to me, her little body tense. When I gently asked what Mrs. Gable had talked to her about, she would just shake her head, her eyes wide. "Mrs. Gable asks funny questions," she'd whisper before burying her face in my shoulder. I started a secret journal, documenting everything, the date and time of every visit, every unsettling comment, every shift in Maya's behavior. A part of me felt foolish, like I was building a case for a crime that hadn't been committed. But the mother bear in me, the part that had fought so hard to bring this child home, knew with absolute certainty that something was deeply and dangerously wrong. The day it all shattered was an ordinary Tuesday. The sun was warm, and Maya's laughter echoed from the backyard, where she was soaring on the swing set I had so proudly built for her. It was a perfect portrait of peace. Then Mrs. Gable's car pulled up to the curb, unannounced once again. I felt my stomach clench, but I forced a polite, neutral smile onto my face as I met her at the door. I invited her in for a glass of water, a gesture of civility she curtly declined. Her eyes were already scanning, hunting for some flaw, some new evidence for her secret file. We were standing in the kitchen, and I was desperately trying to fill the tense silence, babbling about a new book we were reading, when Maya came bursting inside, her face alight with pure joy. In one hand, she proudly held up a drawing of the two of us holding hands under a smiling sun. In her other, she clutched a chocolate brownie she'd saved from her lunchbox. "Look, Mommy. It's us," she exclaimed, her voice ringing with pride. I knelt down and wrapped her in a hug, my heart swelling. "Oh, my sweet girl, it's absolutely beautiful. I love it so much." I looked up at Mrs. Gable, a silent plea in my eyes. "See. Just see what I see. A happy, thriving, deeply loved child." Mrs. Gable's gaze drifted from the drawing down to my daughter. She looked at Maya's brown skin, then at the dark brownie clutched in her hand. A thin, cruel smile slithered across her face. "Well, isn't that just precious?" she said, her voice a grotesque mockery of sweetness. "A little brownie holding a brownie. We wouldn't want you to forget where you came from, would we?" And then she laughed. It wasn't a real laugh. It was a short, sharp, barking sound, utterly devoid of humor. It was the sound of pure contempt. The air in the kitchen turned to ice. It felt like a vacuum had sucked all the oxygen from the room. I watched in slow motion as my daughter's radiant smile faltered and collapsed. Her big, beautiful eyes filled with a confusion that quickly morphed into a deep, bottomless hurt. She looked down at the skin on her own arm, then at the brownie in her hand, then back up at me, her face a mask of bewilderment. She didn't fully comprehend the ugly words, but she felt the malice. She understood the tone, the cruelty. I watched the light in her eyes dim, and in that instant, something fundamental inside of me snapped. A rage so profound it felt like it was vibrating in my very bones surged through me. I stood up slowly, my entire body shaking. "Get out," I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet trembling with more force than a scream. She looked genuinely shocked, as if I had broken an unspoken rule. "I beg your pardon. Get out now." She stiffly gathered her purse and clipboard, her movements jerky with indignation. "This will be in my report, Anna," she threatened, her voice laced with venom. "I don't care," I said, my eyes locked on hers. "Get out." The moment the door clicked shut behind her, my legs gave out and I crumpled to the floor. I wrapped my arms around Maya, who had started to cry silent, shuddering tears, and I held her as if I could physically absorb her pain into my own body. I whispered apologies over and over again, telling her she was beautiful, that her skin was magnificent, that she was perfect. But I knew, with a sickening certainty, that a seed of poison had just been planted in the one place on earth she was supposed to feel completely safe. That night sleep was impossible. My mind replayed the scene endlessly. This was not a clumsy comment. It was a racist, targeted attack on my child, delivered by an agent of the state who held immense power over our lives. I had read the books and the articles about systemic bias, but this felt so deeply personal, so intimately twisted. This was a social worker weaponizing the language of identity to inflict pain. I had to act. The next morning, with trembling hands, I typed out a formal, detailed complaint to the Child Welfare Agency, documenting the brownie incident and the entire history of Mrs. Gable's escalating hostility. I hit send with a feeling of terrified righteousness, clinging to a naive belief that the system, when faced with such clear evidence, would surely do the right thing. I was so wrong. Filing that complaint wasn't just throwing a rock at a hornet's nest. In the eyes of the system, I had just declared war. If you're still here with me, don't forget to subscribe, activate notifications, leave your like, and share this video with someone. The agency's initial response was a deafening silence. Then, precisely 2 weeks after I filed my complaint, the retaliation began. It was swift and brutal. I received a call from a stony-faced supervisor informing me that Mrs. Gable had filed her own extensive report, citing serious concerns about my parental stability, my hostility toward authority, and my inability to cooperate with post-adoption services. My complaint, my desperate attempt to protect my child, was twisted and reframed as the primary evidence of my instability. The racist joke. It was officially characterized as a clumsy but well-intentioned attempt to engage the child in a discussion about heritage. My explosive overreaction, they claimed, was the real issue. It was textbook gaslighting, executed on an institutional level. The unannounced visits intensified. Only now they sent 2 caseworkers at a time, a clear and calculated intimidation tactic. They swarmed my home, clipboards in hand, and began to pick my life apart with a chillingly forensic focus. My carefully curated library of books on Black history and culture. Now it was evidence of a hyper-focus on racial issues that might be confusing to the child. The Black-owned salon I took her to for expert hair care. I was outsourcing my parental duties and failing to bond with my daughter. Every single effort I had made to be a thoughtful, responsible, and culturally competent mother was pathologically twisted into a symptom of my own inadequacy. Their next move was even more sinister. They demanded that Maya begin seeing a therapist, one chosen and approved by them. The reason? She was exhibiting signs of emotional distress. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. Their campaign of harassment was the direct cause of her sleepless nights and her newfound anxiety. And now they were using the very wounds they had inflicted as justification to tighten their grip on our lives. Fear became a constant, suffocating presence. I was drowning in it, second-guessing every decision, every word. Was I paranoid? Was I overreacting? Had I somehow become the problem? The gaslighting was so effective it was beginning to erode my own sanity. I knew I couldn't fight them alone. I drained the savings account I had so carefully built for Maya's college education and began searching for a lawyer. It was a demoralizing process. Many lawyers I spoke to advised me to just comply, to be quiet, to appease the agency. Don't rock the boat, they'd say. You won't win. Finally, I found Sarah, a fierce bulldog of a family law attorney who looked at the mountain of documentation I had compiled and saw it for what it was. "This is classic retaliation, Anna," she said, her voice firm and validating. "This has nothing to do with Maya's welfare. You bruised an institutional ego by filing that complaint, and now the entire system is closing ranks to protect its own. They're trying to make an example out of you." For the first time in months, a tiny glimmer of hope ignited within me. As we prepared for the inevitable court battle, Sarah began her own deep dive, requesting every piece of paper associated with Maya's case file. One evening my phone rang. It was Sarah. Her voice was low and urgent. "Anna, are you sitting down? Found something. Something they tried to bury. This isn't just about a grudge." There was a pause. "This is so much worse." I was looking at the original intake forms from when Maya first entered the system, specifically the list of biological relatives who were contacted and ruled out for placement at the time. Name caught my eye. The last name of Maya's birth mother. Her maiden name was Gable. The world tilted on its axis. My blood ran cold. "Anna," Sarah whispered, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying speed. "Mrs. Gable isn't just a random, bitter social worker." I cross-referenced the public records. Her maiden name is on the list. Anna. She's Maya's biological aunt. It was the key. The one that unlocked the true horror of the situation. Every bizarre question, every sneering comment, every bit of her cruelty suddenly snapped into a terrifying new focus. Her question about Maya's real family. Her venomous joke about where you came from. It wasn't just a racist jibe. It was a possessive, territorial claim. She wasn't looking at us and seeing a happy family. She was looking at me and seeing the woman who was raising her niece, her blood. Her obsession, her relentless campaign of terror. It wasn't about a past failure. She was trying to make my adoption fail so that she could step in and petition the court for custody herself. I was no longer fighting a faceless bureaucracy. I was fighting a woman's secret, desperate, and dangerous quest to reclaim a child she believed was hers, and she was using the full, terrifying power of the state as her personal weapon. The courtroom felt like a meat locker, the air thick with tension. On one side sat me and Sarah, a tiny island in a sea of hostility. On the other, the county's smug, expensive-looking lawyer, flanked by Mrs. Gable and her supervisor. Mrs. Gable sat there with a posture of unimpeachable dignity, the very picture of a dedicated, wrongly accused public servant. The sight of her made my skin crawl. The county's lawyer went first, weaving a masterful narrative that painted me as an unstable, aggressive, and uncooperative parent who was projecting her own issues onto a dedicated social worker. Then it was Sarah's turn. She stood, radiating a calm but ferocious confidence. "Your Honor," she began, her voice cutting through the silent courtroom. "We are here today because my client, Anna, did exactly what any good mother on this planet is supposed to do. She shielded her child from verbal abuse by a state employee. An employee who, it turns out, was harboring a massive, undeclared conflict of interest." Sarah methodically walked the judge through my journal of harassment. Then she called Mrs. Gable to the stand. The tension ratcheted up to an unbearable level. "Mrs. Gable," Sarah asked, her tone deceptively pleasant, "can you please recount for the court the comment you made to my client's 6-year-old daughter regarding a brownie?" Mrs. Gable's face tightened. It was a light-hearted, off-the-cuff remark that was terribly misunderstood. Misunderstood? Sarah pressed, her voice hardening. "Explain to the court how a 6-year-old child misunderstands a comment that causes her to have nightmares and become afraid in her own home. But let's move on. This isn't your only connection to this case, is it, Mrs. Gable?" The county lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection. Vague and irrelevant." "Your Honor," Sarah countered smoothly, "this speaks directly to this social worker's motive, bias, and fitness to practice. It is the very heart of this matter." The judge, intrigued, looked at Mrs. Gable, whose face had gone unnervingly pale. "I'll allow it. Answer the question, Mrs. Gable." Her composure, so carefully constructed, finally began to crack. I am familiar with the family's history," she stammered. "Be more specific," Sarah pounced. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Gable, that you are the biological sister of Maya's birth mother? That you are, in fact, Maya's aunt?" A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. The county lawyer's face went from smug to horrified. Mrs. Gable's mask didn't just crack. It shattered, revealing a face contorted with raw, bitter anger. "This has nothing to do with anything," she hissed. "It has everything to do with everything." Sarah's voice thundered. "Isn't it true that you used your position as a state agent to systematically terrorize this family, hoping to destabilize the adoption so you could petition for custody of your niece yourself? Isn't that what this is really about?" "Objection. Objection!" the lawyer screamed, but the damage was done. The judge had seen it. He had seen the venom and the truth in her eyes. For a glorious moment I thought we had won. After a long recess, the judge returned to the bench, his face a grim, unreadable mask. "My primary duty," he announced, his voice devoid of all warmth, "is to the privacy and long-term well-being of the child." He then turned his cold, hard gaze directly on me. "The details of this case, specifically the undisclosed familial connection, if made public, could cause irreparable psychological harm to the child's sense of security and identity." My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I knew what was coming. "Therefore," he continued, his voice dropping to the temperature of stone, "I am issuing a comprehensive gag order, effective immediately. You, Anna, are prohibited from discussing any aspect of this case, including the social worker's identity and her relationship to the child, with any third party. Not the media, not on social media, not a friend, not anyone. Any violation of this order will be treated as contempt of court, and it will force this court to seriously question the stability of your home and reconsider the current custody arrangement." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. He was threatening to take Maya away from me if I told the truth. He wasn't protecting my daughter. He was protecting his agency from a catastrophic, career-ending scandal. He was burying a crime. He was silencing the victim to protect the institution. "Do you understand me, Anna?" the judge asked, his voice a low dare. I couldn't breathe, let alone speak. All I could do was nod, as hot tears of rage and helplessness streamed down my face. He had won. He had taken my voice, locked my truth in a cage, and handed the key to the very people who had hurt us. I walked out of that courtroom a ghost, hollowed out and invisible. The gag order was a prison cell built of words. Mrs. Gable was removed from our case and I later heard, transferred to an administrative role. A pathetically hollow victory. The immediate threat was gone, but the larger one remained, a permanent shadow over our lives. The system had shown me its teeth and delivered its ultimatum. Speak the truth, and you will lose your daughter. So I was silent. For over a year I played the part of the compliant, grateful parent, all the while feeling like a prisoner in my own life. The fear was a constant companion, a low-grade fever that never broke. What if I let something slip to a friend at the grocery store? What if another parent at school asked a casual question about our adoption story? It was like walking a tightrope over a bottomless canyon, day after day. This order, which the judge had claimed was to protect my daughter, was a slow-acting poison. It created a terrible, festering secret in our home. Children are not fools. They are finely tuned emotional barometers. Maya felt my constant, simmering fear, even if she didn't understand its source. How do you explain to your child that the people who are supposed to help you are the ones who hurt you the most, and that a powerful man has forbidden you from even speaking about it? I lived in that suffocating silence until the mandatory post-adoption supervision period finally ended, and our case was officially closed. The gag order, however, remained in effect, a permanent black mark in a sealed file. But as the months passed, something inside me began to change. I watched Maya, my resilient, magnificent daughter, continue to heal and grow. I watched her spirit, which they had tried so hard to crush, mend itself. I watched her learn to trust the world again, to laugh without fear. And I came to a powerful realization. My silence was not protecting her. It was protecting a corrupt and abusive system. It was teaching my daughter that when you witness an injustice, especially one committed against you, you should be quiet and absorb the pain. I will not teach my daughter that lesson. I am breaking my silence today. With this story, I am knowingly and willingly breaking that judge's unconstitutional order. I am telling this story because the fear of what might happen if I continue to speak is finally, mercifully, less than the guilt of what will happen to others if I don't. This is for every parent who has been intimidated, gaslit, and bullied by a broken system. This is for every child who has been made to feel ashamed of who they are by people in positions of power. They tried to bury my family's story. They tried to bury my voice under the weight of my own fear. But I am not a ghost. I will not be silenced. This is my truth. And I am not afraid anymore. Thank you for listening to my story. Please subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below, leave your like, and share this video with others.